hello, and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, along with my wonderful wife, Janet, and we are streaming live from the Team Needham Abode podcast studio, and we are super excited to have Megan Edge on our podcast today, discussing a wealth of plant wellness just beyond your city's doorstep. So, Megan, welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up being on our podcast.
I ended up being on your podcast by invitation. Thank you so much for that. A little bit about me. Well, I feel very fortunate to have been born into a very nature-oriented family. I grew up in a foraging family, meaning that we went out into the forest from the time I could toddle, probably even earlier than that, to forage for wild mushrooms, wild foods. I also grew up on the ocean, so really close to the beach, where we would get all manner of things off the beach: mussels, oysters, clams, things like that. I grew up in a family too that was very curious. My father he's passed away now, but he was a journalist. He was a newspaper publisher. He was always looking for information, and he was a very grounded man. And my mother was more of she called herself the fae, more of the fairy, the esoteric, perhaps the metaphysical. She was always interested in magic and dreams. And so I grew up with this interesting balance between the spiritual curious and then the grounded, scientific curious. And I've brought both of those perspectives into my life and into the work that I do.
So what work do you do?
I'm a healer. And by that, I assist other people. I help other people on their healing journey to heal from trauma, from grief, from loss, people who are looking for transformation in their life, who are looking for meaning in their life, spiritual, physical, and mental.
Janet, what questions do you have for Megan?
This is a subject we haven't really talked about on our podcast very often. And I think you touched on something that's really important, because so many of us have a belief system. I mean, most of us, healing must require us to have a belief system, right? So how do you incorporate that in? Because there's always that physical side. We always think, like, we're in the medical industry, so we think of, your surgeon or your medication, but there's more to it. Explain that.
There is absolutely more to it. We are holistic. We are in a mind, body, spirit experience as a human being. When our medical system only focuses or fixates on one aspect of ourself, that mostly being the physical self, true deep healing, permanent healing is not possible unless we also are willing to address our spiritual aspects of ourselves, as well as our emotional and energetic aspects of ourselves. If we aren't able to bring all of that in to the healing journey, then we're only addressing one area of our life's experiences and failing, I believe, to really dive into what is the source, what is the origin of whatever illness it is that has manifested itself, that has shown itself in our physical system. Understanding where that comes from the emotional and the energetic aspects of our lives.
So I'm guessing you have a lot of these stories when you talk about physical healing and then, spiritual healing or holistic healing. So give us an example of somebody that's accessed the traditional medical system, and they were looked at, they had some kind of physical symptom. And they were never able to get fixed. Maybe their symptoms were treated with a drug or surgery, possibly, but it didn't really fix the problem. Can you give an example of how you address those issues and maybe a positive story about it?
Sure. Well, I'm happy to use myself as an example. I've had 17 surgeries in my life. I went from doctor to doctor, specialist to specialist, trying to understand a whole host of physical symptoms that I had been experiencing for a long time, chronically. And each specialist that I visited was very good at their specialty. But unfortunately, the toe doctor wasn't going to the knee doctor's conferences and vice versa. They weren't speaking to one another. They were looking at a piece of my body, and then they were addressing the issue in that particular piece, and then prescribing a medication for that particular symptom, rather than looking at all of me. And at no point in time, with very rare exception, did any of these people ask me, "How are you? How are you? What's happening in your life? Where are you living? What are you eating? How are your relationships?" There isn't any room for those kinds of conversations in our mainstream medical approach to health and wellness. I started to ask those questions of myself. And it was when I went to see a naturopath who has more than 10 minutes to talk to her patients, her clients, and she spent an hour hearing me, not just listening, but actually hearing what I was saying. And she started connecting dots between this host of what had been treated as separate symptoms as something that was all connected. And now she was still coming from a physical perspective. It's just that she had a much greater depth of connection, I guess, between the physical symptoms that I was having. And the question that she asked me at that moment was, have you ever heard of something called fibromyalgia? And at the time, this was 20 years ago, I had not. I didn't know anything about it. And in fact, at the time, a lot of doctors dismissed fibromyalgia as just not even being a thing, kind of like chronic fatigue syndrome, right? Which we now do recognize both of those as being something that we can work with. And what was interesting is that when I started researching, which is something I love to do, researching fibromyalgia, I could see where I could tick off all the boxes, every box for fibromyalgia. And while the people in my life were horrified that I had been given this diagnosis, I was thrilled because now I had something I could work with.
Right.
I had something that explained, made sense of everything that I was going through, including the mental processes, the thought processes I was in. And one of these doctors, the exception, he said to me, "How's your marriage?" And I thought, what on earth does that have to do with anything?
Yeah.
He was right. And when I started to ask those questions of myself, what am I thinking? How am I thinking? What are my beliefs about who I am in the world and how I show up in the world, and who I am in relation to this primary relationship, my husband at the time? And you'll notice I said at the time, because part of the healing journey for me was in recognizing that I was not living my life the way that I had come here to live my life. I was no longer being of service. I wasn't following my path as a healer, as somebody who wanted to help, because I had become so constricted in that relationship. And so thus began a process of me looking at my life as part of that healing journey. And what was so beautiful about that is that when I started to make some very radical changes in my life and the way I was living it, my symptoms went away. They receded without medication, without any prescription drugs. I changed my life, and then I changed that. And because I changed my life, that changed what was showing up for me physically. And what was showing up for me physically was showing up because it wanted my attention so that I could do that deeper work. And that's how it all comes together. And once I walked that path and experienced the healing of taking responsibility for my life and taking responsibility for my health, empowering myself to know and understand what was happening, could do about it, I knew that I could help other people do the same thing. And I have hundreds of stories of the clients I've worked with over the years where we've done that exact thing for them. And they have experienced a deep and permanent healing of whatever it was that they came to me with.
Well, sometimes we try to, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised that, you know, our our surroundings or our things in our life, whether it be our marriage or whatever, it can affect our physical bodies. But it seems like we are surprised sometimes, and at least in mainstream medicine, though, like you say, those questions are never asked. And I think
Mhm.
part of the problem is that you probably went to specialist after specialist, and really we should call specialists partialists, because they look at you're right. I mean, because
Yeah,
they
I
only
love
look at
that. I love that.
one,
That's great.
they look at just one system, and we
Mhm.
try to break out system, whether it be an orthopedic surgeon, or whether it be an endocrinologist. Break we try to separate those systems from our entire body, and it's completely impossible, because the bones are related to endocrinology. So we can't separate an orthopedic surgeon's work from endocrinology, but we do it all the time, and I don't think it works very well. I mean, there's a time, with acute injuries or whatever,
Mhm.
that those things are necessary, but for chronic illness, you need to look at the whole body.
Absolutely. And that I think that is the failing, or I know that is the failing of our current medical system, is that we have compartmentalized every aspect of the
Mhm.
physicalness of the human being, even the parts we don't fully understand, but we've labeled them all. We talk about the hormonal system, the immune system, the endocrine system. It's all these systems. If you look at a car, the car is not going to run if everything isn't working, right? If there's no oil, the car's not going to run. If the engine is falling out, the car's not going to run. Somehow we don't apply that same analogy to
Right.
our physical bodies. And I think we could heal a lot of the medical system's failings if we were to do something as simple as compare ourselves to a car. But of course, we're so much more complicated than that. And
Mhm.
one person isn't necessarily going to be able to address everything. That's why we have specialists, I guess. But they could at least talk to one another,
Yeah.
and they
Right.
don't. They each
Right.
have their specialty, and that becomes their like their fiefdom. And that's a detriment to not only themselves, but to the people that they are trying to help. And it creates an isolationist approach to health
Mhm.
and wellness, and it disempowers the patient, who has become not a person anymore, but is now a patient. And if you look at the word patient, what is that person waiting for? What are they having to be patient about?
Right.
Right.
Healing, a resolution that is practical and grounded. Now, I'm not going to lay all the blame, though, on our medical system, because the way that we've been brought up in North America, especially, is to bow down and give over our health sovereignty
Mhm.
to the people in the white coats and the stethoscope. And we're not taught to take responsibility for our health and wellness, right? The
Right.
campaigns are very convincing from the pharmaceutical companies that everything can be solved with a pill.
Yeah.
And the whole point of our conversation today is to look at other ways of healing. What
Mhm.
other medicine is in the world, right outside our doorstep, or even in our backyards, that we can bring into our daily lives as a habit, where we get to the point we don't even think about it, where everything that we do for ourselves becomes a form of medicine.
Mhm. I think you're right. There's such a transition. I'm thinking back as a child, my local physician that was in our little hometown, his approach was so different than what we have now. Like he knew you, like he knew you as an individual and your family, and you could have a conversation about that. And one of the things I remember is um, I got really sick, developed pneumonia, and when after he was done treating, he's like, okay, he knew I was very active in sports. So he came up with a plan with me on how I was going to get back into health or condition. But he also talked about my parents smoked and people would
Mhm.
smoke in the house, right? And at that time, it wasn't taboo. People,
Mhm.
however, he talked to me about how that was going to affect me and what I, what approach. He didn't say, tell your parents to quit smoking or whatever. But
Mhm.
we talked about the aspect that that could be a problem and how to deal with it. And so I think we've lost that ability of communication, is where I'm going with this. I mean, he doesn't
Mhm.
have all the other aspects perhaps of the healing journey, but at the same time, we were communicating.
Yeah.
Now you would only maybe have 5 or 10 minutes with a provider and you're out the door. There's no
Mhm.
long-term interaction, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, and that is a tremendous failing. I keep using that word, but really that's where
Yep.
we're at, but
Mhm.
in Canada as well as the United States. Excuse me. It's interesting what you say about smoking. I just suddenly remembered, as I have this little bit of a cough right now, my mother smoked when she was pregnant with me, and at the time, she was told by her doctor, "That's okay, 1 or 2 a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Yeah.
fine.
Right.
That's fine."
Yeah. We've seen that. Yeah.
And as a baby, both my parents smoked. Now,
Mhm.
granted, they did quit eventually.
Mhm.
That has long-term effects
Right.
on the body. And then now that I'm the adult, it doesn't make sense for me to blame my parents for that. I can do things to help heal my lungs. If
Right.
my lungs are a weak point in my
Right.
body because of that exposure at that
Mhm.
time to cigarette smoke and the chemicals that are it's not tobacco isn't the issue, it's the chemicals that are in the
Yeah.
tobacco. Tobacco itself is a very revered plant, in its natural state. But there I can do to help heal
Mhm.
that damage to my lungs. That's me taking responsibility for something that was out of my control at the time. That's an empowerment piece. And
Right.
and that's not what our doctors are taught to give us
Mhm.
any longer. They're not taught to empower us.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, it's basically, I mean, and drug, you know, two pharmacists here, and drug therapy is a perfect example. I mean,
Mhm.
most all drug therapy is just treating a symptom of something else.
Mhm.
It doesn't actually heal anybody.
No.
I mean, a good example is, type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is caused by the stuff you eat.
Mhm.
Um, it's not caused by drug deficiency. But how do we treat it? We treat it with drugs.
Yes.
And I mean, that to us just makes absolutely no sense. But when you look at the system, you're never going to reverse it with drugs.
No.
You'll just keep being on the drug the rest of your life, and the system makes money. And you
Yeah.
gotta, you really need to look at that aspect. It's like, um,
That is a
when
really important aspect, and I think it's something that a lot of people, blinded themselves, or they allow themselves to be blind to. And we say things like, "Follow the money.
Yeah.
Look at the billions and trillions of dollars that are being made by a very few, very large pharmaceutical companies." And you have to ask yourself, where is the humanity
yeah,
in
Sure.
this approach to healing? And as you pointed out, Shawn, in an emergency situation, our medical system kicks in and damn, if I break my leg, I'm going to the hospital. I'm not going to
right,
try
Exactly.
to fix that myself. I mean, I could, but I'm not going to.
Right.
There's someone else who's trained to do that. But when it comes to my overall health, my longevity, my vitality, I am not going to the hospital. I don't go see I have a doctor. I'm grateful for that because that's a gateway into if I need something
yeah,
specific. I haven't seen my doctor in years. Years. I don't take any prescription medications. I don't even take Tylenol or ibuprofen any longer because I know that there are other plant medicines, tinctures, holistic approaches that I can utilize that are equally, if not more, effective in not only helping with a symptom, and there's never only one because we are a holistic body, but actually a whole host of symptoms. So, for example, everything I do is medicine. I was thinking about this morning before we got onto the show. My water has turmeric tincture in it and a mushroom tincture, both of which I made myself from fresh turmeric roots and from the mushrooms that I go out and wild harvest. There's medicine in this water. So I don't just drink a glass of water. I use water as a vehicle to put nourishment into my body in a very simple way. It's not complicated to put a couple of drops of a tincture into your water and then drink that throughout the day. And the long-term benefit from that far outweighs taking an anti-inflammatory, like a NSAID anti-inflammatory, because of all the side effects that are inherent in these kinds of prescription medications. And I mean, bless you both for being pharmacists, but you also know this. You know, I've watched some of your other podcasts. I get that where you're coming from, if I can be so bold, is to educate people about what they are putting into their bodies,
Right.
so that they have
Well,
choices.
yeah, exactly. And that's the goal of our podcast, is to educate, and you already said empower, educate and empower people to take charge of their own health. And Jan and I are two pharmacists that we've been disillusioned in pharmacy, and that's one of the reasons we do things like this, because we are two pharmacists that largely don't believe in drugs to treat most long-term disease, because what we've been doing over the last 30 years is not working. America is sicker than ever.
Yeah.
Yet, there's still a new drug to treat some other, the same disease. It's not, we're not progressing, in my opinion.
No, but nature, I mean, touching on this, nature is where we first took our medicines from, right? The
Yes.
history of it is from the beginning, right? I mean, when humans figured out something worked. And like you said, the side effect profile is so different if we're talking like turmeric versus Tylenol or an NSAID. The side effect profile of something natural in whole, I mean, because I think that the pharmaceutical side has been really good extracting from different plants to make a certain type of medication. However, the side effect changes when we take and manipulate the nature of it. Like when they take just one part, it doesn't always work the same way, and it works much differently in our body. I mean, a good example would be red yeast rice. We've gotten the statins from that, yet statins treat people so differently than red yeast rice. So,
Yeah.
our roots are in the medicinal uses of things on the earth that we've kind of lost. We've
Yes.
kind of lost it.
And I will go so far as to say that that has been intentional.
Yes, I
We have
agree.
been intentionally misled and misinformed about how medicine works,
Right.
so that we are not paying attention to our kitchen herbs and all of the antiviral and anti-inflammatory properties of those common herbs. We are instead going and grabbing a ibuprofen instead of
Right.
taking a cup of sage tea, for example. We just don't remember, and most people don't know that they can find out and remember this information, and that they can create for themselves a healthy lifestyle versus I have a headache, I have to go and grab a Tylenol.
Yeah.
And when we look at the side effect profile, and this is something that is very dear to my heart, and I do a lot of work with clients advocating for them within our medical system. I have watched medication toxicity overload put people in the hospital. I have watched it rob them of their cognitive function, rob
Very
them of
cool.
their physical mobility. And these are long-term medications that they've been given for specific illnesses, such as Parkinson's.
Yeah.
And it's now to the point where when I have conversations with the physicians and say, this is what we're seeing. This is not dementia. This is not Alzheimer's. This is medication toxicity overload. Her bloodstream is so full and it's crossed into the blood-brain barrier. It's crossed the blood-brain barrier. She is toxic.
Right.
I now have some doctors saying, yes, we know. Now, they're not doing anything about it yet, but at least there is that recognition that the illnesses that are bringing people into the emergency can be traced back in some of these cases to the amount and the sort of medication and the interactions between medications that people have been given. What I've seen as well is the over-medication. So you take one drug, it may be for a short period of time, it helps with something, but then you start to experience the side effects of taking that medication. So you go to your doctor and you say, well, now I have this, this, and this. And the doctor says, great, here's another medication to help with the side effects. And before you know it, 5 or 6 different, very potent, strong pharmaceutical medications have been given to you. And your body is trying to
The
manage
strain.
that
Mhm.
that overload. And when we start getting into medications that are being given for mental health issues, that is a whole other kettle of fish, and that is
Yeah.
scary what's happening to people from those medications.
I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it's hundreds of thousands of visits to the doctor every year because of medication side effects. Hundreds of thousands.
And hundreds of thousands of deaths.
Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
I think medication errors in the medical field is like number
Number
3
3 of all deaths.
as far, heart disease is still there, but at the top. But we don't we don't talk about we don't talk about this very much. Like it's just, you know,
I've
it,
had doctors say to me, to my face, you know that list of side effects? You don't need to worry about that. That's just there. They just have to print that. I had a doctor actually say that to me. They just have to print that. Where
well,
do you think that came from?
Right,
right.
right.
Well, in my mind, over and over, what we were taught, and I think, like you say, we have to take responsibility, but safe and effective.
Mm,
Well,
mm.
is it? Is it safe if I'm having side effects? And really, in reality, we were also taught, and no matter what we put in our body, too little of water is harmful. Too
Mm.
much of water is harmful. So there's always a balance.
Mhm.
You cannot say that, right? Like, there too much of one thing that's good is bad, right? And
Yeah,
vice versa. So you have to have a balance.
you do have to have a balance, and that is also what is missing from the medical approach that we experience here in North America. There is no balance, and we're not taught that our food is medicine. We're not taught
Right.
Right.
that the air can be medicine or water can be medicine. We're not taught that, so we don't pay attention for the most part to the foods that we're putting in our bodies. And unfortunately, it's still the case that our doctors, when they go through medical school, they are not taught
Mm-mm.
anything about supplements, about minerals, about food, about
And and and
nourishment.
and not only are they not taught food can be medicine, but they're not taught that food can be poison. Let's
Yes,
not
Right.
forget that. If we
yes.
eat the wrong foods, I mean, that's part of,
Well,
the problem in the United States is people are eating the wrong foods and,
we're
you know
labeling things as food that we shouldn't even be ingesting. I mean, that
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
me is the real thing. I mean, I'm not saying in my life that I haven't, enjoyed an Oreo, but really, I mean, I don't know when the last time I ever went down that road. But if
Mhm.
you look at that package, it's not food, right? It's
That's
not
right.
food.
Yeah.
So that's part of the issue of what we are doing to ourselves is
Mhm.
we don't look
Right.
as, we talk about real whole food that, and I guess there's probably some things that won't rot, but if it's not going to go back into the earth, we probably should not be.
Yeah, if it can't decompose in a
Yeah. Right.
reasonable amount of time,
If
uh,
if it
what are
Yep.
we doing?
Yeah, we always say if it doesn't rot, don't eat it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know.
Excuse me. Mhm.
So Megan, as we wrap this podcast up, I'm going to stream your website here. Tell us about your website and if anybody wants to get a hold of you, how they get a hold of you.
Sure, sure. Well, the website is very comprehensive. There's, as you can see on the screen, the Meet Megan section. There's all manner of ways in which you can interact with me through my YouTube, through my blogs, through my writing, through the book and oracle cards that I've published, which are all based on nature and heart shapes that I found in nature as a healing tool. The work that I do, my work philosophies and my work theories around healing, what I believe is possible for people to be able to achieve. And they can achieve that working with me, but really I'm mentoring them to bring them back to themselves so that they understand their power to heal themselves. So all sorts of different ways in which you can learn about me through the website. And then the work that I do in nature, and we didn't really talk about that too much, but that nature-based medicine,
Mhm.
you can go to beyondthegardengate.ca, and that's where I teach people about nature. I teach people about going out in nature and the medicine that's there, the benefits of that. and help people to feel comfortable out in nature. A lot of people don't. They're not exposed to it. They don't go to the park in their city. They don't go out of their city boundaries to the wilds, and they're uncomfortable. They've kind of been taught to fear nature. And so part of what I do is help people no longer fear nature, but see it as a really important part of their connection to the earth, and then their connection to themselves as well. And then you can find me I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram. And I'm also on Learn It Live. This is a teaching platform, an online teaching platform, where people can come and learn from me in that online environment.
Awesome. Awesome. So as we wrap this up, Megan, tell us what you have a passion for.
So many things. Fundamentally, my biggest passion is watching people become empowered. Watching people have that aha moment of, oh, I actually can do this. I can heal. I can feel well. I can step into myself, my authentic self. I can show up in the world. And that moment of realization is what I love helping people come to, in whatever way I can help them with that. I truly deeply believe that every human being on the planet has the potential to be healed and whole, mind, body, and soul. And that's what I hope to do and be able to help people with.
I love it. I love it. Well, you'd help us realize our goal, which is to educate and empower individuals to take charge of their own health. So thank you for helping us.
Thank you for having me on the show.
And thank you for listening. Listeners and viewers, thank you for tuning in to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune in Monday to our regularly scheduled podcast, 12:30 to 1:30 Pacific Standard Time. Thank you.